in the woods with night danger. The log that I'm sitting upon is laid out across the bottom of what is normally a creek bed. My phone is resting against a branch on the soil that is normally under 1.5 to 2 feet of water, running water. And yet, there is no water. You see, as I think I've mentioned, we're in a bit of a drought. It's dry here. It's been dry for a little while. This creek hasn't had any water in it for over a month. And this leads me to one of the great mysteries that I, Detective Night Danger, must solve. Where do mosquitoes come from? You see, I'm bedeviled by these things on all sides, and I can't for the life of me conceive of how they are here. You see, we're told a couple things about mosquitoes. One, that they drink blood, and this is part of their reproductive cycle. And we're told that they lay their eggs in bodies of water. So we have this mosquito killing trap that's on the back of the yard, and it's a little puck, and you put it in a bucket of water with some grass clippings, and mosquitoes come and they lay their eggs in the water, and the puck poisons the eggs, and the eggs die, and the mosquitoes, like, generationally are killed off. But of course, if mosquitoes lay their eggs in water and live off of blood, how is it that when there is so much or so much lack, which is to say so little water, how am I still drowning in these little buzzing creatures? And where are they getting their food from? Most animals, or we have trail cams, animals tend to steer clear of this piece of property because my dog marks his territory all over the place and chases after and barks and howls at anything that comes on. I sincerely doubt that somehow the 7 squirrels that live in these woods is enough to sustain the quantity of mosquitoes that I am encountering. The only possible logical conclusion is that the medievals were right, and mosquitoes, like flies, spontaneously pop into existence, presumably as some form of penance against mankind for the sin of Adam. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Today, what I'm here to talk about is what I am pretentiously calling the cybernetic model of an adventuring sandbox. It is a thesis. It is an untested thesis. We are strictly in the realm of theory today because it is a theory that I'm going to be putting to the test when I start my Demon City campaign this fall. So what do I mean by a cybernetic model? What I don't mean is that everyone is going to have robot arms. You see, this is a common misconception about the word cybernetic. It does not mean robot prosthetic. Rather, cybernetic comes from a Greek word which basically refers to like helmsman or steersman or governor, somebody who directs a boat, steers a boat. And the discipline of cybernetics, in an academic sense, is all about the applications of feedback loops, positive and negative. With a positive feedback loop being something that repeats and compounds, and you get exponential runaway. Like if you hold a microphone close to a speaker that is playing audio that is the microphone is picking up, the microphone will pick up its own sound, and this will compound over time. You get that mic squeal, right? That's feedback. Exponential runaway. And then negative feedback is like when you're steering a boat. You're trying to get north. And so, as external forces push your boat a little bit west, or some winds come by and you move a little bit east, you adjust. You receive that information and you adjust to get yourself back on course, back headed north. Now, what I am going to be attempting with the upcoming Demon City game is a negative feedback loop as the kind of the model for my criminal underworld, wherein paranormal, horrific stuff is happening for the players to investigate. And why would I do this? I think it's, especially for a game that only has a single party, you're not running multiple tables and multiple adventuring parties, there's often the question of, why hasn't someone else solved this already? Why hasn't somebody else cleared this dungeon yet? Why hasn't the local lord dealt with this problem? Why hasn't the mob taken over everything? Or why haven't the police eliminated the mob? And it's because there is this equilibrium. There's a stasis, a baseline state that, through a series of interactions between different forces and poles, is kind of stabilizing. Everything has kind of reached a nice equilibrium. To see this, a great example of this in fiction is in the first Jim Butcher Dresden Files book, Stormfront, talks about the mobster Johnny Marconi, and how he was a good stabilizing influence on crime. He kept crime from getting too out of hand. He kept it professional. He didn't endanger police. And so this, of course, implies that the current desirable outcome, or the baseline, the stasis model for the criminal world in this fictional version of Chicago, is not a police takeover and crushing of villainy, and not a criminal takeover and crushing of the police, but rather this kind of push and pull of resources in multiple directions that, rather like an object being pulled in two different directions at the same time with equal force, is kind of stuck. Or at the very least, or maybe it's moving and it's the different forces are adjusting it so that it's moving in roughly the same direction and things stay stable. This is the hope that I have for this Demon City scenario, is to the question of that a player might have of, why haven't things resolved themselves, or why hasn't so and so faction overcome or won, is, imagine 3 nodes, right? 3 different major players or factions within a criminal underworld, right? A, B, and C. Now, faction A wants something, or is exerting some kind of pressure upon faction B, and faction B is exerting some kind of pressure on faction C, and faction C is exerting some kind of pressure on faction A. You get this closed loop where they're all kind of moving in on each other. And the reason that faction A has not succeeded in its attempts against faction B is because faction C is putting pressure on it from the other side. He cannot devote his full resources, his full capabilities towards target B, because he has to also kind of keep C off his back. This is an oversimplification of the design, but the idea being that you have this stalemate basically in place between multiple factions as your initial game state. Then the question becomes, what happens if the players, through the actions that they take, disrupt this balance? Maybe they destabilize faction C, and faction C is no longer in the picture, right? Maybe their players are cops and they arrest everyone in faction C and throw them all in jail. Well, what happens? Faction, you would think maybe, now that faction A doesn't have that back pressure from faction C, now faction A can exert its full force on faction B, and faction B is toast, and faction A is going to take over. It's just like Macho Mandalf. The game is flattened. Everything's over. Wrong. Because even as faction A experiences the relief of pressure from faction C, so too does faction B, who is trying to take out or cause problems for faction C. Faction B is now able to turn around and respond to the pressure that faction A is putting on. And now you have a 2-pole feedback loop once again. You have once again reverted to a stalemate, a stasis state. So, what if instead the players offset? They make faction C better. Maybe the players are criminals. Maybe they join faction C. Maybe they team up with faction C, and now faction C has more resources and can afford to keep faction B off its back while pushing harder on faction A. Now faction A is weakened and has to respond to this. Faction A is no longer able to exert pressure on faction B. Faction B is now more able to exert pressure on faction C, and you've restabilized. I think that this is broadly how the world works, which is why nothing ever happens, because every time every time one person gets ahead and pushes hard and gains ground, he creates a new set of conditions that can cause new problems, and once again everything regresses back to this equilibrium, this stable state. And I think you could apply this to basically any RPG as a game master. If you think like in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, obviously you can imagine different factions all being at odds with each other. And of course you want factions to win at some point, right? Like, you don't just want to be stuck in a perpetual locked state. Rather, every time a major change happens, you can reevaluate your flows of pressure and identify the new equilibrium that things are moving towards. You have to assume that stability is desirable for the system, if not necessarily the nodes within the system. So, let's say that you have orcs and kobolds and a human keep maybe on the borderlands. And they're all kind of in this stalemate. And the orcs, they get a real windfall. They gain some resources, maybe they get some player support, and they experience runaway exponential feedback. They experience massive growth. They squash the humans. They slaughter the kobolds. They've completely taken over the map. They've flattened the game. What do you do now that a patron or a faction has flattened the game? And now there is no tension. There's no conflicting interests. There's no independent actors under a fog of war, because one guy has just won. My theory is that you can then, all you have to do is zoom in on that faction and identify the sub-factions and the stasis state that is within that faction. Who are the generals? What do they want? What are their objectives? If the orcs have taken over the whole land and there's no one to oppose them, what's going on internally? And you simply do the same thing until you percolate towards a civil war or a balkanization of the faction that results in a new set of nodes, in a new state of stalemated negative feedback. This is fairly abstract, but I really am pulling this from how I play player characters when I'm on, not behind the screen, but before the screen. When I'm playing in my buddy's game, I make characters they have a heading. They have a long-term objective. Not because it's, I want to take over the game and, make it all about my objective, but rather so that anytime a new variable hits my character, I know how to respond. How I respond to that new variable is to reorient myself towards my objective. Oh, this knocked me over here. What do I got to do? I got to take actions that get me back on track. Or this action brought me more on track. Perfect. I just need to make sure that I don't overcompensate or whatever. And so it's a constant steering forward to get to the goal. And what I'm hoping to attempt with this Demon City campaign that I've prepared is to treat the campaign world as a player character with an objective. And that objective is stuckness. The objective, the desired goal of the world is unification. Well, not unification, but rather comfort, stability, maybe stagnation if you're feeling cynical. The goal is for the campaign world to constantly be pushing towards a state where things will just be business as usual, where things will go on as they're supposed to, where there won't be any adventures in Hobbiton. And this creates an environment that is rich for the players to push on the scales and cause problems. And for those problems to then result in occasional exciting exponential runaway. But for that, any end state, any end result of the player's actions to then be responded to by not individual factions or nodes within the world, but rather the kind of the world itself is responding to in a way that calcifies and brings back a state of perpetual tension, of fixed, unyielding tension. The goal is not to reduce to a monad, to reduce to a single unified thing, but to kind of hit this, or to regress to this total chaos where you have things going in all directions and nothing's connected, but this kind of webbed, like a bunch of posts with rubber bands connected to them, where they're all pulling, and some of them are pulling in different directions, and at any moment, any change would cause it to break and fall apart, but then reassemble itself in a new form once again under tension. And so the goal is anti-entropic, but also it's anti-endgame. It's against the idea of some perfect conclusion where everything is resolved. Every resolution of tension, or every elimination of a source of tension, is to produce new sources of tension, new sources of contrary and opposed motion. You know, I'm not sure if I'm making sense. I can see the model in my mind's eye. I can see the shape of all the factions. And I don't necessarily want to talk in detail about what I've written down, because I know that at least one of my players watches my videos occasionally. So I kind of got to keep things under wraps for now. But at least for posterity, I can have this video out here saying, this is what I'm intending to do. This is my theory. And we'll find out if it's viable, if it works. Probably by Halloween. Maybe by Christmas. It depends on how much the players like the game and how efficient they are and yeah, it's dependent on a number of factors, but we should know by the end of the year. Does this model work for preventing the patron play flattening, where one figure simply dominates and results in a boring game, but also does it provide an interesting environment for player characters to game in? Is it an interesting criminal underworld to investigate? Is it an interesting wilderlands of warring factions to adventure in? This remains to be seen. But I'm excited about it, and I've been thinking a lot about it, and I've got schizoid diagrams in my notebooks articulating what I'm hoping to get to. So we'll just have to wait and see. And when I have results from this experiment, you'll all hear about it. We have the hypothesis, but we don't have the data yet. So this has been Night Danger. I'm double dipping. I recorded something just 2 days ago, and I'm back out here again because I can just feel the creative juices happening right now. And I'm not saying it's because I'm sleeping better, but I think it's probably because I'm sleeping better. So, without further ado, adios.